Looking for a place to call home. For many, venturing out into this market demands a leap of faith. I'm Mark Irons with that story coming up.
It's an affordability crisis for people chasing the American dream, a home of their own. And the difficulty of finding suitable housing often impacts Catholic family life. We take a deep dive into a problem that affects millions.
He wants to select bishops and shepherds that are close to the people, that really have a sense of where people are, the smell of the sheep.
Meet America's youngest bishop with his own rich life history and campus experience with young Catholics of color. Bishop Robert Boxie III is on the record about Pope Leo's decision to select him for an important new role.
When asked after your camp experience, do you believe Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist? They say yes.
And bringing the faith to kids in Catholic formation. We go to a Catholic summer camp to see for ourselves how the gospel is spread, one child at a time. EWTN News in Depth starts now.
I don't pray with all of my clients. We do pray for our clients, but we definitely try to meet them where they're at with the reality of the market and then just figuring out how to navigate it.
A Catholic couple, both real estate agents, explain the pressures they see on young families trying to break into the housing market. In today's current affordability crisis across the country, it's impossible for many and difficult for most. Welcome to EWTN News in Depth. I'm Colm Flynn, and it's a pleasure to be sitting in for Catherine Hadro. Well, America's housing crunch is more than just a predicament about where to live and how to pay for it. In a country where the average first-time home buyer is 40 years old, the affordability crisis affects decisions about getting married, having children, and forming a family, all of which is important to maintaining a robust Catholic Church. We have extended coverage on this far-reaching problem of housing affordability, beginning with reporter Mark Irons.
We're looking to find a house.
We are quickly needing to expand, and at this point, it's challenging.
Nicholas and Victoria Brightwell have a growing family. Parents of 3, their townhouse in Chesapeake, Virginia, is starting to feel a little cramped. They bought the place 8 years ago, thinking of it as a starter home.
Our son was only 1 year old when we moved in. And we just thought it would be a landing pad. We'll get a bigger house in a nicer neighborhood, things like that. And it hasn't been possible.
High prices and mortgage rates are boxing many hopeful home buyers, including the Brightwells, out of the market.
We probably would get approved for a loan. We would probably be able to get a home, but the reality is we would very likely be house broke. We'd be house poor. You'd have a home, but we'd be struggling in other ways.
This summer, the U.S. median home price reached over $440,000, according to the National Association of Realtors. And 30-year mortgage rates close to 6.7%, the highest level in just over a year, according to mortgage buyer Freddie Mac. Rates have eased slightly in recent weeks. The Brightwells are Catholic, and though their home search is full of uncertainty, they are very grateful for their church community, which has provided a spiritual, stabilizing force in their lives.
We are very blessed to be a part of the church that we go to.
Our local community is really strong.
In its teaching, the Catholic Church recognizes the importance of housing. Echoing Pope Francis as he addressed a group at the Vatican last year, Pope Leo said, "Land, housing, and work are sacred rights. It is worthwhile to fight for them." With the backing of U.S. Catholic bishops, the bipartisan 21st Century Road to Housing Act became U.S. law last month. It moved forward without the signature of President Donald Trump, who said he wouldn't sign it unless Congress passed a voter ID law, the Save America Act. Through a number of measures, the law seeks to lower the cost of housing and encourage more and faster home construction, including by cutting back federal housing rules and reforming environmental reviews. It will also limit corporations from buying many single-family homes. It's the broadest attempt in decades to address housing affordability. There's no question times have changed.
Come up to the house.
In 2014, Catholics Andrew and Marielle Thoburn, parents to 9 children, built their home here in Strasburg, Virginia. Andrew says they couldn't afford to build it today as the price has doubled. Just one example of the challenge current buyers face in today's market.
It's just a combination of all the economic environmental factors, the high interest rates. In this area in particular, home values got pushed higher.
They know the buyers' concerns firsthand. The Thoburns are real estate agents covering Virginia's Shenandoah Valley and surrounding communities. This more rural part of the state attracts many prospective home buyers who hope to escape the higher cost of living found just 60 miles east in northern Virginia, closer to the nation's capital. Living in a neighborhood like this one just outside Washington, D.C., here in Fairfax, Virginia, might seem unattainable for many prospective home buyers who just want a modest place to live. So they keep looking for something cheaper, much further out. But in recent years, people searching out in the country for lower cost could still have sticker shock.
We've helped a lot of people move here to the area, but we've also had some clients who have gotten here, really like the area, but just did not find it as affordable as they were hoping.
It is more affordable than Northern Virginia,
Right.
but that percentage is getting smaller. You know, that gap is getting smaller.
For about 3 years, the number of homes sold in the U.S. has stayed around 4 million. Historically, that number hovers around 5 million. And home inventory levels remain below historic levels as well. Since 2022, the U.S. housing market has been in something of a slump as mortgage rates rose from record lows during the COVID-19 pandemic. Andrew says it's a tough market, but buyers across the country could have more options than they think.
There is inventory out there. You can get good mortgage products. A lot of people think you have to have a big down payment to buy a house, but it's very common to see zero down payment loans.
In their personal life, the Thoburns know the spiritual value of a place to call home.
Everything's centered around the home. Where you raise your kids, it's where your faith grows, it's where you pass on the faith.
This is the ground from which the family grows. It's where the faith grows from. It's where children learn the faith. It's where they see God's provision and receive His graces to grow.
Whether someone is looking for that home in a daunting market or trying to provide for all the other needs of family life, Marielle says it all comes back to trust in the grace of God.
I think it's really, it just transfers to all facets of life, because I think that if I were to lay in bed at night and think, oh my word, I have 9 children to feed for all these years. I have this to provide for their education, their clothing. Like, if you think of that in the grand scheme of things, it could be very overwhelming. But you don't. You take it day by day, because every single day God shows up and He's going to give you exactly what you need for that day. My grace is sufficient. And so you just have to just trust. You have to walk in that faith.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
Mark Irons there with that report. And to dig further into this housing affordability crisis and its impact particularly on the Catholic family, we are joined now by Father Stephen Caith. He is a professor of history at the University of Notre Dame, specialising in 20th century America. Father Caith's research focuses on Catholic involvement in urban development, public housing and suburbanisation and its effect on Catholic faith. Father, thank you for joining me and you're welcome to the programme.
Thanks so much for having me.
From the research you have done looking into housing in the 20th century and its economic patterns that you have seen, how would you say and characterize the housing crisis that we see today, let's say compared to housing availability 50 years ago or even 20 years ago?
Yes, I think the crisis that we're going through right now is particularly acute. I mean, I focus my research most on the period immediately after World War II, where the housing crisis was caused by the fact that during the Great Depression and during the Second World War, there wasn't a lot of new housing built, and the housing that was built wasn't maintained. And then all of those GIs come home from the war, they want to get married, they want to start a family, and there just wasn't enough housing. And that gets solved in a lot of ways by the GI Bill and other ways of lending money to home buyers and of incentivizing home builders to build more housing. And it's really the suburbanization, the building of mass suburban housing complexes that helps answer that problem. And then in the 70s, when the children of those veterans start to look to buy houses, the baby boom generation, then there's also high demand, but there was also inflation, which was combated by rising interest rates. And so it made some home buying more difficult. But the key point to mention there is that it was still the case that home prices were still relatively low compared to real wages. So the portion of income that a family was spending on housing was still relatively low. Today, we're again having a housing crisis marked by a lack of supply but especially an affordability crisis. Today, the median home costs more and more of a family's income, to the point where in some major metropolitan regions, even a dual income family, a house is out of reach for them, right? And so I think it is fair to say that even with the kind of ups and downs of housing crises from the 1940s till today, we're in a particularly acute moment, and it's affecting a broader swath of the American population.
Yeah, and to give an example of what you're talking about, close to us here in Washington, D.C., in the city of Philadelphia, a single family home has risen 69% just in the past 8 years. And let's talk about the connection between church and housing, because I know the Catholic Church teaches that there is a link there. In fact, Pope Francis wrote that the family has the right to decent housing, fitting for family life. Pope Leo has said that housing is not an ideology. He said it's truly living the gospel. And I know that you have written extensively on homelessness and public housing, but the current housing crisis, it extends well past low-income families now who are literally trying to get off the streets. This is going into the middle classes. Tell me about that.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think most Catholics immediately think of housing as, when they think of it as a moral issue, will think of the people who are chronically homeless or on the street, the lowest income brackets for whom public housing is often a resort. But this housing crisis moves well beyond that. And so it moves into the middle class, as you're saying, even dual income families having a difficult time being able to afford a home that would sustain several children, that's comfortable, that's near the parish that they want to go to, that's near good education, et cetera, et cetera. And so the focus of the moral crisis around housing today is much broader even than those who are in a crisis situation. And I think both Pope Francis and Pope Leo have been pretty clear that these are the types of crises that are only going to be able to be solved by government action. This is not something, typically the church wants things to be done on the lowest level possible, kind of subsidiarity, but there's a recognition that these are effects of national economies, but also of state and local zoning and state and local economies, and governments are going to have to do things to help bring costs down so that housing is available for these middle-class families.
You know, it's amazing when you hear the statistic now that the first-time home buyer in America is 40 years old. With that statistic, what does this tell us about people then getting married, about starting a family, about wanting to live that dream, their Catholic life?
I think we see the way that housing affects all sorts of stages of our moral and psychological and emotional development. If you finish, let's say you go to college, you finish college, when are you able to rent that first apartment or buy that first home? Or are you still living, even after graduation from college, living with your parents? Are you going to cohabitate with the woman that you're dating because we can't afford 2 apartments in this major city? That's too much. Well, we can't, not going to get married yet, but we'll live together. So now you're cohabitating. You're pushing marriage off. We can't afford to buy a house. Okay, you finally buy a house. Well, are we going to have kids? How many kids are we going to have? Are we going to limit family size? And then are we going to be able to live near either of our parents who might be able to provide daycare for our children? We can provide family support as those parents age and need health care. So there's all sorts of familial connections that housing is involved in that then people have to make these decisions, and they're constrained by the availability and the affordability of housing.
And what do you say to those people when they come to you, those young couples? Many friends that I have who say, we're holding off to get married until it's affordable. Then when we do get married, the house isn't big enough to have children yet, so we're waiting. And it can be so disheartening for them when they see no end to this, that there is no stage down the tracks when they could afford that house that they want.
It's true. I do think that there is some instances in which I encourage a kind of lowering of expectations. I do think that my parents' generation was more prepared for a starter home, and starter homes were more available and in the market. In fairness to young people today, that's one of the problems we have, is not only the availability of housing, but the types of housing available. Is the smaller house, the starter house that you bought when you first got married, available? And then you'll buy a bigger house later down the line. That sometimes that's not available. But if it is, to look for that, to be okay with renting for a bit. I think there's other ways that we need to encourage kind of collaborative solutions, right? Of couples living near one another, yes, further from the city or further from the parish that they want, but kind of forming community that way. Again, I think Pope Francis and Pope Leo are right to say that this is going to take government action. This is not something that's going to be able to be solved by individual couples or even a small collection of couples. But to press for those types of change and to hold out hope and build community in the ways that they can.
Yeah, well, we definitely hope and pray for that change. Father, thank you so much for
Indeed.
joining us here on News in Depth. Well, there is so
pleasure.
much more ahead on this edition of the program, so don't go anywhere. Stay right there.
Certainly when I entered Harvard Law School, this was not on the radar at all.
An unusual path to becoming America's youngest bishop and the first African American elevated to that role in nearly a decade. We go on the record with Washington's new auxiliary bishop, Robert Boxie III. Keep an eye on your watch, because there's been a spirited exchange on social media about those who take up a lot of time when confessing their sins. Some advice ahead for your next reconciliation.
I'm Marcel Regis, and I'm at Damascus Summer Camp in Emmitsburg, Maryland. More about their first year here coming up.
And a look back at the spiritual lessons of the summer, with kids excited about their blossoming faith. EWTN News in Depth is coming right back.
And to the Black community here, in such great numbers today, you have waited and prayed a long time for this moment.
A new bishop reflects on his past, his present, and looks to the future as he receives the Shepherd's Mitre and begins his new role as vicar for cultural communities and synodality for the Archdiocese of Washington. At 45 years old, Bishop Robert Boxie III is the youngest prelate in the United States. He is the first African American Catholic in nearly a decade to receive the mitre. And though he's never been a pastor of a parish, he helped revitalize Catholic student ministry as the Catholic chaplain of Howard University, a prominent, historically Black university here in the heart of DC. His Excellency recently sat down with Catherine Hadro to discuss his appointment and his reflections on the Black Catholic Church. Here is Bishop Robert Boxie on the record.
Bishop Robert Boxie III, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me.
Just to start us off, can you tell us how you first found out that Pope Leo had appointed you as a U.S. bishop?
Yeah, so it was Saturday afternoon, April 25th, about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was at my desk in my at the rectory at Immaculate Conception, working on my weekend homily for the Vigil Mass in a couple hours, and at Mass and Confessions that Saturday. And I get a call from the nuncio, Cardinal Pierre, and then he asked what was I doing, and I said, "Oh, I'm just working on my homily. I have Mass in a couple hours and just finishing up." And then he asked if I was sitting down. Yes, I'm sitting down. I'm at my desk, working on my homily. And then he said, "Pope Leo has appointed you the new auxiliary bishop of Washington." At that point, I stood up and I said, "Are you sure I'm too young? I haven't been a pastor." That was the first thing that came to my mind. "Are you sure I'm too young? I haven't been a pastor." And he said, "Well, the Holy Father has seen your work. You've become highly recommended by the priests in your diocese." But I was like, no. I haven't been a pastor yet. I'm too young. Are you sure about this? The Pope is sure about his position, and he wants to appoint you. You've done great work. This will be a great service to the church. And I'm at the whole time just shaking my head. This can't be. And so then he just asked me point blank, "Do you accept?" And I said, "Yes?" ? And he was like, "Great. This is going to be a great moment for the church." And then we hung up the phone, and then I hung up, and then literally I get my pillow, and I just scream in my pillow for the next 5 minutes, trying to think, what did I just accept? What did I just agree to? What's happening?
And you've been ordained a bishop just over a month now. I imagine, are you still processing this new reality?
Yeah, I am. It's still new, it's still fresh. And, you know, the ordination was it was tremendous. It was a real gift to me and my family and my community, a real gift to this local church. It's a new reality that I've never experienced before, but it's one where I know that the Lord has prepared me for this moment. And you know, there have been a number of graces before the ordination, at the ordination itself, and since then. And the Lord's just been incredibly generous with me.
After gaining your chemical engineering degree from Vanderbilt, you then went on to Harvard Law School. And from there, you clerked for a federal judge in Maryland and then worked as a successful lawyer here in Washington, D.C. And it was then that you discerned to become a priest. And that is some high achievements that you decided to step away from and to enter seminary. Can you just reflect on what your spiritual life was like during that season in particular? Harvard Law, successful lawyer.
Yeah, great question. Well, if you can believe it, I became more Catholic, if you will, or I was living out more of my faith in law school. To be honest, that was the first time that I had gone on a vocations retreat for the Archdiocese of Boston. Now, the graduate school chaplain at the time, he basically gave me a pamphlet that said, hey, you need to go to this. And we'd never talked about vocations, never talked about priesthood. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I have too much work to do, you know, all these cases to read. But I went, and that was the beginning, at least at that point in my life, of trying to figure out, okay, I think the Lord has some plans for me. I eventually went on another vocations retreat for the Archdiocese of Washington to see if the first one was a fluke or if that was just, you know, just a happenstance. And basically, the short answer is the Lord called, and He placed this desire that kept growing and growing and growing that I couldn't simply ignore or couldn't simply disregard.
Prior to this appointment, you served as Catholic chaplain for 6 years at Howard University. Can you tell us more about that experience and how that experience shaped your priesthood?
Yeah, I'll just start out by saying this. For the 6 years that I spent at Howard, I had the best job as a priest in the United States, hands down. And I would put that to any other priest in the United States. And the reason I say that is Howard is an incredible community. It's one of the premier historically black colleges, universities in the United States. It's incredibly diverse. Students from all over the world come, and it's a really special, unique community that is unlike any other community that I've ever been in, and really unlike any other community, I think, in this country and in the world. But over the years, we've been able to build a really vibrant, active, growing Catholic community. And I'll just put into perspective as well. We have about 110, 111 HBCUs in the United States.
Okay.
About 10, 11 of those universities have a Catholic ministry. So about 10%, which is not a great number. And of those 10, about 5 or 6 have a priest on campus.
Wow.
So what we're doing is one of 5 in the entire United States and really in the entire world. So it makes this community of young adult black Catholics really unique and really special. And it's an area where it's ripe for even more evangelization and bringing more folks into the church.
There's such a need there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Your appointment marks the first time in nearly a decade that an African American has been appointed a U.S. bishop. And you reflected on that very movingly at your Episcopal ordination mass. You said in part, you have waited and prayed a long time for this moment, and I humbly accept this role on your behalf, standing on the shoulders of our ancestors and giants in the faith. Can you reflect on the significance of your appointment to the U.S. Black Catholic community right now?
It's huge, and it's much bigger than me. You know, there has been a fraught history within the Catholic Church when it comes to black people. We'll just be honest. There was a significant period in the church where African Americans were relegated as second-class citizens in the church and in the house of God, having to sit in the back of the church or in the choir rafters, receiving sacraments last, being denied even entry into the church. Black men being treated horribly in seminaries and being refused to study for the priesthood and religious life, and also for black women being refused or being treated poorly in convents, and so there's been a fraught history within the black community and the church. Now, the church has done an incredible amount of good, as well in the black community, especially when it comes to education and schooling. But there is still some healing that has to take place, and I think with my appointment, so many people feel hope. And God willing, I'll be doing this for the next 30 plus years, and so to hopefully really make a mark and an impact in the church.
Shortly after your appointment, Your Excellency, there were some social media posts and even some articles labeling you, quote, DEI warrior bishop. I wanted to give you the chance to respond to that label, that characterization, and why do you think it was that was some people's initial reaction to your appointment?
I think it speaks to the polarization and the division in this moment that we're in right now in this country, unfortunately. And everyone is trying to put people in camps and in silos and to pit people against each other. And that's not what I'm about. That's not what the church is about. And whoever posted this, they don't really know me. And the thing that I would say about that is, unfortunately, the term DEI, referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion, has been hijacked. It's been turned to something negative and to cast aspersions and to label people in a negative way. And when we think about it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, these are things that have actually been a part of the church and a part of the Christian faith from the very beginning. God is actually the author of diversity. It was intentional in his plan that we all bring something beautiful and different to the table. Each of us is made in the image and likeness of God. We're all equal before the Lord. And inclusion, the church is universal. The church is to be the home for everyone. Christ came to gather all the nations. And if you think about it, this is exactly what heaven will look like, right? And so we pray in the Our Father prayer, on earth as it is in heaven. And so, if heaven will be like this, then we have a duty, an obligation, a responsibility to work for that heaven right now.
And for us to be looking at everything through a political lens.
Exactly.
Finally, I know that as auxiliary bishop, you'll largely be assisting the Archbishop,
correct,
Cardinal Robert McElroy here in D.C., but you do have this special insight, having worked in D.C., served as a priest in D.C. So what do you see here as your mission during this appointment?
I want to to connect with more people. I will be assisting our Archbishop Cardinal McElroy, but as an auxiliary, that gives me more flexibility to be out with the people, and that's actually part of my role as Vicar for Cultural Communities and Synodality. So part of my role is to be out and connect and to listen to various communities and constituencies in the Archdiocese and beyond, and in particular for those here in the DC area, who are working on the Hill or in law firms or lobbying groups. I've been there. And I've had that experience as well. I look forward to just connecting with so many people here, not only in the Washington D.C. area, but also all around the country, because there are a number of folks who are seeking and who are searching, and I was there too, seeking and searching. Where is the Lord in this? How is He calling me to glorify Him with my life, with the gifts that He has given to me?
Such a message of hope. Bishop Robert Boxie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine.
And there is much more to Catherine's conversation with Bishop Boxie. He shares more about his vocation story, reflects on Pope Leo, and discusses what young African American Catholics bring to the church. You can find the full interview on YouTube. Just search for EWTN News. Headlines are next, here in the Week in Review. Stalemate. That seems to be where the US and Iran are as we hit a crucial milestone this week in the Iran war. That headline tops the Week in Review. In a high-profile event 60 days ago this week in Paris, President Trump signed the US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding, a preliminary ceasefire and 14-point peace framework intended to give both sides 60 days to resolve broader sanctions and economic provisions.
Bravo!
But since putting his signature on the preliminary agreement, surrounded by European allies at the Versailles Palace, the negotiations have stalled. The accord called for an immediate halt to military operations, a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and constraints on Iran's military program as broader negotiations continued. But it only took days for the US bombing and Iranian drone attacks on America's regional allies to resume amid distrust and disagreements in the negotiations. Both sides are now playing hardball.
Let me be clear. Until the United States fulfills its commitments under the agreement, including lifting the blockade, releasing frozen assets, lifting oil sanctions, ending threats and military operations on all fronts, and implementing the other conditions which it committed, the Strait of Hormuz will not reopen.
Well, with stalled negotiations between the US and Iran, Iran has been holding separate talks with neighbouring Oman, a normal ally of the United States, about a plan to manage ships transiting the strait. But this week, President Trump threatened bombing attacks against Oman if it gets in the way of a peace deal with Iran. The Trump administration now says it will announce crippling economic sanctions against Iran on Monday, adding to sanctions that are already in place. Well, in the midst of war, President Trump found a chunk of time this week to give reporters a tour of the major renovations he is overseeing at the White House.
This is the highest quality stone you can get, and especially for something like this, it's rated a 1,000,000-year plus. That means it has a 1,000,000-year life. Can you imagine that?
From replacing the asphalt driveway at the White House with white granite to enhanced flagpole that he has installed, to a new helipad being constructed on the South Lawn, the president proudly showed off the renovations. And at one point, he signed the back of one of the granite stones. Its front is shaped like an eagle and will be laid into the helipad's presidential seal. He says the helipad will have multiple purposes.
This will be much better for state arrival. And in fact, instead of being on grass now, they'll be using that almost like a table. They can have events on it. They can have people go there for cocktails and then walk to the ballroom after that's finished.
And the ballroom construction continues almost around the clock, 7 days a week, 20 hours a day. That's despite a district court injunction ruling the above-ground ballroom construction cannot continue without authorization from Congress, which controls funding on federal property, including the White House. But the administration asked the U.S. Supreme Court to overrule that decision, citing infringement of presidential power. The National Trust for Historic Preservation, the plaintiff in the case, says President Trump is trying to outrun judicial review by rushing construction while the case winds its way through the court system. And a sobering new financial milestone for the United States. The financial debt has reached a new record, $40 trillion. This debt reflects decades of tax cuts and rising spending under both parties. Economists explain the federal government owes more and more because it is not bringing in enough tax revenue to pay for the enormous costs of the war in Iran and other defense needs, social programs like Social Security and Medicare, and the exploding cost of paying interest on that massive debt itself, which grows by the hour. And for the everyday consumer, that unhealthy imbalance means higher mortgage and car loan rates. And for businesses, it means a tougher time borrowing, investing, and growing a company. There was a mixed reaction in Washington to that $40 trillion record debt.
The 40 trillion is a big number. It is smaller when we look at the publicly traded amount because our Social Security funds and other government entities hold a substantial amount. And what we're going to do, we're going to have to grow our way out of this.
My children are going to be paying decades from now for tax cuts that they gave to billionaires last year. That is what has happened. They are giving billionaires tax cuts. They are spending our taxpayer money on vanity projects at the White House, and they are expecting future generations of working people to pick up the bill.
Advocates for a balanced budget call ever-growing deficits unsustainable. The Bipartisan Policy Centre says additional economic events like AI disruption, a recession, or a global war could take the debt situation from a huge challenge into a full-blown crisis. And an update now on our lead segment last week on EWTN News in Depth about the clash over vaccines for Catholic school students between the Florida Attorney General and the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops. Florida Attorney General James Outmire has reacted to the Florida Catholic Conference and its defense of the Catholic schools' vaccine policies. This is the latest in an unprecedented back and forth between the Sunshine State's Attorney General and the bishops. In late July, Outmire wrote a letter to the Florida Catholic Conference asking for an explanation of its vaccine policy, which does not allow for religious or conscience exemptions. Outmire alleged the policy is out of line with state law, which does allow exemptions, and wrote that failure to comply could jeopardize millions of dollars in voucher funding for Catholic schools. The Florida Catholic Conference responded that its vaccine policy is to protect the health of all students, staff and faculty at its schools. In response on X, Outmire wrote, "The Church should nevertheless recognize the confusing nature of this religious mission in light of some U.S. dioceses not following it. Further, the Catechism strongly emphasizes the right of parents to manage the health care of their children and the fundamental right of conscience. It's healthy and essential for the Church to have these conversations." Later this week, in an opinion piece for the Miami Herald, Archbishop Thomas Wensky, president of the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops, reiterated the conference's policy, writing, "We reaffirm the moral responsibility to vaccinate to avoid serious health risks for children and for the general population. Our Catholic schools are following the law, and while we would welcome the opportunity to dialogue with the Attorney General, we are prepared to protect our students, defend our rights, and preserve religious freedom." Meta is back in court this week, facing its biggest trial yet on the harm social media poses to children. If it loses this landmark case, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram could completely have to change how its social media platforms operate. Advocates and parents stood outside the federal courthouse in Southern California on Tuesday, holding a large banner listing the names of hundreds of children who died from social media-related harms, like cyberbullying. Attorneys General from 4 states allege Meta has contributed to the youth mental health crisis by knowingly and deliberately designing addicting features that hook young users and harvesting their data without parental consent. They call this trial social media's big tobacco moment.
Just like a generation ago with big tobacco, Meta, like other social media platforms, has engaged in behavior to maximize its profits while harming the public health. With this trial, we're sending an important message. Powerful technology companies must follow the law, and if they don't, we will hold them to account.
The trial will last at least 6 weeks and could cost Meta up to $1.5 trillion in damages, as well as require it to change its apps. CEO Mark Zuckerberg is expected to be called to testify, and this is the latest in an avalanche of lawsuits against Meta and other social media companies over the safety of young users. Now, the tech giant has defended its safety record and says it has a strong case against the attorneys general. Well, the baby at the centre of a major custody battle underwent his first major heart surgery this week. His surrogate mother, McKenna West, allegedly refused to abort him after he was diagnosed with a congenital heart condition. Now his biological parents are suing West for $100,000. Doctors performed a complex open-heart surgery on Monday in Texas. The newborn was just 6 days old. West says the biological parents pressured her to get an abortion, and so she travelled to the Lone Star State to give birth to ensure the baby received medical care for his heart condition. The baby is now in the biological parents' custody, and they will not share any more updates on his health. And they're suing West for violating her surrogacy contract. West is fighting in court to gain custody of the baby, whom she's named Gabriel. The court hearing is next week. The mosaics created by disgraced Jesuit father Marco Rupnik will be covered up on the facade of the Lourdes Basilica in France. The decision comes ahead of Pope Leo XIV's visit and after years of discussion on what to do with the artwork. Bishop Jean-Marc Micas, who oversees the Shrine of Our Lady of Lourdes, shared on Thursday that all mosaics on the basilica's facade will be covered out of respect for the abuse victims. Rupnik has been accused of spiritual, psychological and sexual abuse of dozens of women religious, including some within the context of the creation of his mosaics. He was removed from the Jesuit order in 2023 and currently faces trial at the Vatican. The mosaics will be covered ahead of the Pope's visit to the shrine, but will remain hidden long after the Holy Father returns to Rome. Pope Leo's 4-day apostolic journey to France in late September will include Lourdes as well as Paris and the northeast city of Metz. And EWTN News will bring you all the coverage of this trip. And that's the week in review. Next, an important question and debate right now on social media. How long is too long in the confessional? And some words of wisdom about the sacrament of reconciliation when we come back. Now, there's no question about the importance of confession in Catholic life, and the Church tells the faithful to confess their sins at least once a year. But how long should the sacrament of reconciliation take? Well, that question recently erupted into a heated debate online. On August the 12th, a user on the social media platform X had a request for her fellow Catholic. She wrote, "Please stop taking over 30 minutes in the confessional booth. This isn't a place for you to rant about your life. This is a confessional booth." She encouraged faithful to prepare and mediate on their sins beforehand, and if needed, quote, book a spiritual consultation with a priest. Well, that post garnered more than 200,000 views and hundreds of comments from priests, religious and lay people, some in support, others in disagreement. Well, the heated online rhetoric aside, how long should a confession take and how should we prepare for the sacrament of reconciliation? To help answer that question, we are joined by a familiar face to the show to help explain this Catholic life question. Father Aquinas Gilbo is a Dominican friar and serves as a chaplain and vice president of ministry and mission at the Catholic University of America right here in Washington, D.C. Father, it's great to see you and thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Good to see you, Colin.
I thought we could do a live confession here and we could time it on the screen, but jokes
We'll keep it to 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, let's see. Jokes aside, when you go in for confession, often there can be a queue of people behind you. Maybe Mass is starting shortly. Time is of the essence. How long should you take?
A confession should take as long as it needs to, right? Especially in that context where somebody in the confessional may be coming on a Saturday afternoon or before a weekday Mass. It's a regular confession. Maybe it's something they do once a month. I would say that kind of confession shouldn't take more than a minute or two, right?
Really, a minute or two?
Well, if you prepare yourself correctly, right? If you stir in your heart real contrition for sin, you've made an examination of conscience, which is what the Church asks us to do in preparing for a confession, for the celebration of the sacrament, is to have a simple list. And we name our sins, as the Church says, by species and number, which is a fancy way of saying just what kinds of sins are they and how many times, for each one. So it's, I've yelled at my kids 3 times, I've honked the horn in traffic 5 times, or things like that, right? It's I cheated on a test 3 times, those kinds of things. So it's basically kind of the generic type of sin and then number. That's really all that's required for a good celebration of the sacrament. If the priest needs more context, he'll ask.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't, you just continue with the confession.
Some people on social media were pointing this out. They said it's
Right.
not the person going in to confess that takes up the time. It's often the priest who's asking
Right.
for more details or giving more
Right.
advice, and that's what's taking up the time.
Sure.
How do you strike that balance?
So I would say in terms of like having just a concise confession, then the priest can offer a quick word of counsel and encouragement. But again, that should be somewhat brief, fitting for the time, because yes, there are a line of people outside.
Now, be honest, does the priest ever judge the person coming in when they're taking too much time? Someone like me who's like, look, this is just the last 24 hours.
Right.
This is all the sins I've done here. How long have you got?
No, I can tell you on a college campus, we get a lot of that, right? If somebody's not been to confession for a long time, or there's been some kind of traumatic event where, they want to really bare their soul and work through something, a good confessor within a minute or two can tell, like, this is going to require a long conversation. And so in a way that meets the immediate needs of the penitent, opening the door to saying, this is going to require, a lot more conversation, maybe more
We'll do this
time
in
than
spiritual
we need right now.
consultation at another time or something like
Let's
that.
finish the celebration of the sacrament, and I invite you to come and reach out to me outside of the confession. We can sit down for as long as you need, and we'll discuss the problem then.
Because you do see it, and I often see it too, before Mass, you see that queue,
right.
and I've been in the queue, and you're looking at your
Right.
watch and saying, Mass, I'm
I've
going to
been in
miss
there
the beginning
too.
of Mass,
Yeah.
and then you're next in line
Right.
to go in, and then the priest has to rush out
Right.
to prepare to celebrate Mass. So you can see then how people are then frustrated in the queue. So would the advice be maybe to come earlier and to maybe go at a time that's not before Mass, so that you do have that buffer window?
This is really part of the job of the priest, of the pastor, right? To really assess the needs of his parish, right? I mean, what are the needs for confession? When should I hear confessions? When should I begin? At Catholic University, we've been there 4 years now, and I can tell you every year we've had a different schedule for confessions, because we're constantly adjusting to the needs of the students. What we do now, on Sundays especially, is that we'll have two priests in the box 45 minutes before Mass, and they will continue to hear,
It's like
through
standard and the express lane.
Exactly.
Like, if you just want to come in for a minute, here's your guy.
The students figure out who actually moves them along faster than the other. But then we'll actually have those two priests hearing confession through at least the homily, just to try to get as many as possible. Or if I'm the only one hearing confessions and I have to leave to start Mass, if there are penitents still there, I will offer to come back after Mass. It's, again, I think it's really up to the priest, the pastor, the confessor, to make himself as available as possible, within reason, to the needs of his people.
It's amazing when you said at the beginning that typically a minute or two is all it should take.
Right.
And it strikes me, even for people who are coming back to confession, who haven't been in a long
Right.
time, they're trying to figure out, well, is this a sin? Is
Right.
this a sin worth mentioning in here?
Right.
And even for Catholics who go often trying to work through, look, I confessed this before, but I've fallen again, I've messed up again, I need more strength and guidance. So I know many people might be thinking, it's impossible to get it done in a minute or two.
So in those cases, maybe 3 or 4, but still, I think it's, again, going to be up to the confessor to recognize in both those situations. I mean, so here's someone who's trapped in a particular sin. They're going to really need some encouragement and counsel. Here's someone who's not been to confession in a long time, and there's some catching up to do. But I think in both situations, a good confessor can move the penitent through the confession, celebrate it worthily and well, but then again leave the door wide open for further spiritual counsel outside of the confession.
You see me in the line saying, guys, you might want to go ahead of me. No, go ahead of me. I'll go at the end.
Right.
We know the church, it encourages an examination of conscience beforehand.
Right.
What does it mean to prepare yourself properly, so that when you go in, you are ready
Right.
for the confession and you can make it as quick as possible, but as efficient as possible?
Sure. I think it's sitting before the Lord in prayer, thinking back to the last time you went to confession. So what's happened since then, right? And what are the grave sins that you may have fallen into? And then just to maybe grow in some self-awareness. What were the circumstances around that? How did I fall, into these sins? Am I really sorry for it? Am I resolving to not fall into this sin again? I think all of those things go into making a good confession. It's not just a question of remembering the sins and how many times, but taking a look at our lives, especially that space of time since our last confession. How am I growing in the spiritual life? Maybe how am I regressing a bit? And how can I make this confession not only a new starting point in moving forward, but really opening my heart to the healing and forgiving graces of the Lord?
And Father, very quickly, if your work at the university, are you seeing more young people coming back for confession?
As I said earlier, we have to have 2 priests in the,
Because there's
confessional
more people
before masses.
coming.
We
That's
do. It's one of the first things that when we arrived on campus a few years ago, just made it clear. When will we be in the confessional? Consistent times, consistent days. It's all predictable, and so the students know when we're in there, and they come during holy hours, before masses, during masses, or they'll even just stop in the office, make an appointment. We hear confessions all the time. So the young are really discovering these kind of Gen Zs and Gen Alphas. They have a real sense of their need for mercy and forgiveness, and a real eagerness to grow in truth and virtue.
Father, we have solved an online debate on X. Isn't it great?
I can't believe yet another debate on X.
About confession. It's wonderful. It's great that people are talking about
exactly.
it. Father, thank you so much for coming in.
All right.
We work very hard to create an environment where Jesus can come and speak into these young people's lives.
Next, we go to a Catholic summer camp for some important reflections on faith formation for young Catholics. What the kids learned, and we can learn too.
Well, it's back to school time for students across the country with fond memories of a summer well spent. And for some, those memories include Catholic summer camp, where getting outdoors and back to nature means they are that much closer to God. Roselle Reyes profiles 2 camps and talked to camp directors and campers to find out why these experiences are so impactful for this Faith Journey in-depth report.
God made this, and it's amazing, you know? Like, you just look at the mountains and the trees, and you hear the wind, and it's just like, wow.
These are high school boys talking about feeling closer to God during their time at Camp Wojtyła, a Catholic summer camp for middle school and high school students located in the heart of the Colorado Rockies. Camp Wojtyła was launched by Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, in 2007 under the direction of couple Annie and Scott Powell. Both were Focus missionaries who had a great love for the outdoors and a passion for ministry. They named Camp Wojtyła after Karol Wojtyła, Pope St. John Paul II, who loved to minister to young people in the outdoors.
And he said, if I can get particularly young people out from the shadow of these lies into a place of beauty, into the mountains, into the wilderness, into a place of silence, then we can allow Jesus to speak into these young people's hearts and remind them of who they are. And we were like, that's exactly what we want to do.
Camp Wojtyła seeks to integrate the Catholic faith with adventure. Daily Mass, the sacraments, and prayer are woven into every moment at camp, whether it is on the trails or around the campfire.
So everything we do has a spiritual component. And when you're climbing that mountain or when you're scaling that rock face, what are the ways in which that relates to the spiritual life? How does climbing a rock face, being tied to a rope, how does that help us to understand what it means to trust God?
These middle school girls tell us what they have learned during their time at camp.
The waterfall was so big and grand, and it was so cool to see something that big. But then also to realize that God's even bigger than that, and he made it out of nothing.
I've experienced God's love through all the nature and the hikes we've gone on, and the prayers and adoration and Mass, and it's just so beautiful over here that I can feel God's love all around us, and how he created nature and then how he created us.
It has been more than 20 years since Annie and Scott Powell came up with the idea of Camp Wojtyła, and they feel grateful to see the fruits of this ministry.
I think God makes it abundantly clear every year how much it's not us and how much it's us creating this environment for him to be heard, for him to be seen, and for him to work into the hearts of young people. And so we get to have that front row seat, really, of watching how God works in the lives of young people and how much he loves his children and how much he wants them desperately, and he's going to do anything and everything to win their hearts and bring them close.
Hundreds of miles away on the East Coast is another Catholic wilderness camp called Damascus.
I feel like I found out that Jesus loves me more than I can imagine.
Damascus Summer Camp started in 2001 when a group of parents and parishioners in Columbus, Ohio, realized their kids needed an experience of the Catholic faith that was adventurous and joy-filled. That summer, they put together a week-long event for about 60 middle schoolers and named it Catholic Youth Summer Camp. Over the next 2 decades, the camp continued to grow. Now it welcomes more than 4,500 campers each summer, with full-time missionaries that serve the region year-round through retreats and outreach. What was once a traveling summer camp became a missionary movement with a new name, Damascus, named after the city where St. Paul encountered the living God and began his life as a missionary.
Damascus exists to awaken, empower, and equip a generation of youth through life-changing encounter with Jesus. So we just really believe that Jesus changes everything, and we exist to try to introduce as many people as we can to Jesus through like high-quality programs.
Branching out of a home base in Centerburg, Ohio, they launched a summer camp in Brighton, Michigan in 2023 and launched another summer camp in Emmitsburg, Maryland this year.
Here at Damascus Summer Camp, they want kids to step away from the distractions of daily life and experience high adventure activities that lead to high adventure faith. Like right now, it's lake time.
Like we actually want to challenge that status quo in their life, which is part of why we do kind of more of the crazy stuff, right? Like, you're afraid, like that's okay. Like you don't have to be afraid, and then lead them in prayer and show them that grace is something that's like real life.
We asked 2 campers what they loved most about camp, and their answers were the same: adoration.
It was like a different experience because the priesthood brought Jesus right to you.
Honestly, Eucharistic adoration last night was really nice. I loved the Eucharist procession, but I loved when we came back and we knelt. The body of Christ was brought up to us, and we were just able to enjoy that peace with the Lord.
Luke Welsh was a Damascus camper back then and is now the camp director at the Emmitsburg location. He tells us how the camp made a huge impact on his faith formation, and that he hopes to bring the same life-changing experience to the younger generation.
What do you hope the kids take away? If there's one thing they can take away from this camp experience?
Yeah, I think that God is real, like really real, and he loves them. I think that's it. That, God's not an idea. God's not something distant. God's a person who actually wants a real relationship with them and wants to love them.
Rosal Regis, EWTN News in Depth.
Many thanks, Roselle, for that report. And it looks like they were having a lot of fun there at that camp. And that just about does it for this edition of EWTN News in Depth. I'm Colin Flynn, and be sure to join us again same time next week here for more news and reports important to your Catholic life. We hope to see you then, and thanks for watching.